Hi and hello, breaking news. Well, not the very latest news, but a new King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard album has dropped, as people say nowadays. Now, I am a fan of King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I would actually consider myself quite a fan of this band, but this was the first time where I felt I was a bit reluctant to really listen to this album. Now, the last time I saw King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard live was when they did a rave show. So basically, a completely and strictly electronic live set, you know, more or less pure EDM. And well, that's not really my genre. I enjoyed that concert a lot, but also left the show with the feeling of, well, now we've seen that phase of King Gizzard, or we've seen the band do that, but I really hope for the next album they will move away from that electronic phase. Now we've got the latest King Gizzard album. It's their 28th or 29th, depending on how you count the studio albums, and it's called Alien Metal. Yes, my notes say use tinfoil. I don't know who writes those. And, well, the album is a purely EDM techno album. Yeah, let's find out if still there's something to enjoy on this next electronic excursion from King Gizzard, or whether alien metal simply is there to alienate fans in this fresh review. The flirt with electronic music, electronic dance music, techno, and several kinds of subgenres is going on for a bit now among the ranks of King Giz. However, there seem to be two main figures within the band whose brainchild this latest album and this whole techno phase is, namely Joey Walker and Stu McKenzie. However, the entire band is involved on this album, but everybody is credited with synth. Another main musician on this album is, of course, Nathan, the modular synth table, the synth setup that the band has constructed and also used during the live shows. And I think Nathan was used for creating the music of this album. The band seems to have slowed down a little bit in terms of, their pace of releases or release schedules, which I personally think is not a bad thing, especially after Phantom Island, which also is an enjoyable album, but felt a little bit like the band was running out of steam. I welcomed their step to, at least as a band, slow down a little bit with their releases, which doesn't mean that the band has been inactive. The single band members have dabbled in solo projects. Both Joey Walker and Stu McKenzie have released solo albums or solo projects that are definitely in the electronic sector of music. So these all were already precursors or signs that the next King Giz release would probably be something more electronic. According to the band, a lot of material was developed for this album, material that potentially could have become alien metal. A lot of demos were, recorded but then discarded again, and The final product, Alien Metal, with its 8 tracks, basically is the outcome of a pretty much impromptu jam session with the synths. A jam session that they then finally narrowed down to those 8 tracks that now have been released as Alien Metal. The cover already maybe hints at it, and if you listen to the music, at least I would say that King Gizzard's brand of electronica on this album, but already before, has a bit of an overall dark, nocturnal, sometimes also a bit industrial vibe. This is all emphasized or added to by the whole alien metal concept, something from outer space, something strange, something metallic, or maybe also robotic. A lot of the sounds that we hear on this one are quite aggressive, techno EDM sounds. Also the production, while being quite clear, also has a bit of a aggressive edge at times. And in the music, in the lyrics, we get themes of outer space, travel, life from outer space, but also basically, or as a main theme, as far as I could hear, automation, AI, and the connected ecological issues that come with AI and the automation and digitalization of our society. Now, what's also interesting about the album is, and I am definitely not the first one to mention this or to notice this, that if you play the album on rotation without breaks, you will notice that the last track blends into the first track again. So actually the album loops infinitely. This is something King Gizzard have done before on their heavy psych-rock album Nonagon Infinity, and they do it again now in those EDM techno clothings. Basically, you could enter the album at any point and have it play on loop, but the official first track is called Sapiens, and it pushes the listeners directly into happenings with electronic beats. It's kind of an instrumental hardcore techno track. Nicely prepares you for, well, what you've got to expect from this album. So if Sapiens already pushes you away from the album instead of sucking you in, you probably won't be happy with the entire sound and with all of the tracks on Alien Metal. All the tracks, of course, blend into each other or segue into each other to create this rave flow and to have this looping effect. So the next one is the title track, Alien Metal. I think the band nails the authentic rave sound, but also incorporates typical elements of the King Giz sound, not only on this track, but also elsewhere on the album. But for example, on Alien Metal, there's a little sort of Middle Eastern influenced melody. They could have put this also in a different context on their microtonal psychedelic rock albums. So if you listen closely, you can identify trademarks of King Gizzard music. Then we get to a track called Super Heavy, Super Critical. This one oozes a trance party vibe. It's got a great arrangement, great dynamics, or evolvement throughout the track. There is heavy use of vocoder. This also is an element you get on almost every track of this album. So whenever there are vocals, they are always heavy vocoder vocals. You never hear, the normal, the ordinary voices of the band members. And I think they also used this effect not only to emphasize the techno approach, but also to create this alien from outer space atmosphere. Super heavy, super critical. For me was the first track where my interest was really tickled. This track really makes you feel super. Kill for the Steel follows, a track with very spacey synth passages. It's got a dark tone, features a bit of industrial beats, longer instrumental passages, and there's something really unsettling about those vocoder vocals that repeat lines like, "We don't wish death upon you, but we will kill for the steel." This is followed by Level 5, a track that was released as a single before the album was released. This one's got a dystopian drum and bass sound, and I think the drummer, Michael Kavanagh, Kevs, actually plays real live drums on this track. So there are a bit of analog instruments involved on the album, though most of it, I'd say 95%, really is synthesizers and electronic beats. And this live drum sound really adds to the music here. Level 5, as I read it, openly or most openly addresses the issue of automation, artificial intelligence taking over. Let me know what you make of lines like, "Conditioned, the sky dematerialized, stars fell flat, rebellion machine in rise. Imprisoned, we shut our eyes. Our faith is blind, put your trust in autonomy, level 5. The level 5 at this time is apparently the highest level of automation that is spoken of in self-driving cars. So as soon as such a car reaches level 5, that would actually really mean that you can, as a driver, you don't have to do anything. You can actually lie down in the backseat of the car, and the car will do all the driving, all the navigating, and all the the reactions to the traffic. AI could really mean the biggest change in society, also in our work, how work is done, since the Industrial Revolution and the advent of the internet. As mentioned, this was an advance single. Musically, I have to say, this is not my fave on the album. And when I heard this one, this was also one of the reasons I wasn't looking too much forward to this album. I like the track actually a lot more in the context and in the flow of the album than as a standalone single. In fact, I would argue that the whole musical concept of this album actually makes it hard to, in the true sense of the word, single out tracks as, standalone songs. And this album is more about the whole flow, the atmosphere created by the sequencing of the tracks, by the sound and the overall vibe that is created. Nonetheless, with its vocoder vocals, that glossy electronic sound combined with the lyrics, I think this track really drives its point home. Most likely on level 5. Alien metal then continues with rapid alpha decay. This is where the album lets one breathe a bit. The beats are fading out a bit more in the background. The whole atmosphere, this frantic clubbing techno atmosphere is toned down a little bit for a more melodious, I would say, trance synthwave track. And this is a welcome change in the flow of music. I actually like this track a lot with its vocoder harmonies and its more melodious synth chord progressions. Next up is possibly the catchiest track or segment of the album, You Cutie. This one's got a lot of energy, probably also helped by what sounds like a chugging little metal guitar riff underneath the beats and the synthesizers. I couldn't really find in the credits for this album, I couldn't find any notes saying that actual guitar was played. So probably this also is a synth pad, a synthesizer sound that emulates a metal guitar. But this track easily, with a bit of a rearrangement, could also be one of King Gizzard's metal tracks. And maybe that's why it feels a bit like coming home after all this techno clubbing stuff. Even though this is still an electronic EDM track, but with this one, you definitely hear that this is King Gizzard playing. I don't know, is this one written from the viewpoint of an alien, or are we the aliens? In any case, this one really goes hard. And the album, well, doesn't really collapse, but loosens up a little bit with the final track, Atomic Collapse. And this is an instrumental, maybe not too memorable, but creates again a very nice atmosphere. I'd say this one has a little bit more ambient sounds going on, and it softens down a little bit. It's a bit like calming down after the heavy raving of tracks like You Cutie and other ones. But then, as mentioned, it transitions back into the heavier beats of the first track, Sapiens. It feels like an interstellar, slightly dangerous trip with alien metal. King Gizzard have delivered a convincing, high-energy rave album with influences as varied as Jean-Michel Jarre, German techno of the 1990s, to acts like The Prodigy or Infected Mushroom. I'm just dropping here a few names that I could come up with because I'm really not an expert in electronic dance music and techno. I'm sure this will be a bit of a divisive release in the King Giz discography, with some fans dismissing it entirely and other fans maybe celebrating this new foray into, well, rather unexpected, unusual territories, at least unexpected territories for a band that to this day is usually still referred to as a psychedelic rock band. But with its hypnotizing synthesizer sounds and that, constant flow of beats. Also, this kind of electronic music has something trippy and psychedelic about it. I have played this album now several times, and I have to say, I started to enjoy it more and more with each successive play. I would actually go as far as to say that for me, there seems to be more commitment, and this project seems to be musically a bit more focused than the Silver Chord, which was the first kind of dancey, electronic influenced album by King Gizzard. Of course, there's also Butterfly 3000, but I would say that one was more kind of an electronic pop album with still clear songs and psychedelic elements, whereas the Silver Chord really was an attempt of modernizing the sound of King Gizzard and go full electronica. I think Alien Metal works better in this regard than the Silver Chord. Despite the rave flow of the 8 tracks, there still are, at least to my ears, song structures, especially on tracks like, as mentioned, UQT, Level 5, or Super Heavy, Super Critical. And even though this material allegedly was created during a jam, an impromptu jam, it feels somewhat composed and structured and not simply like a random 44-minute techno improvisation. I'm not sure what real aficionados of EDM, drum and bass, and techno music would think about Alien Metal, whether this would be regarded as something impressive or maybe rather, a curious footnote, a little funny experiment. But after several listens to this album, I've come to the conclusion that I actually like this one a tiny bit more than the much more retro-sounding previous album by King Giz, Phantom Island. So that ultimately I'll give Alien Metal, even though this will never become my favorite King Gizzard album, and it still is not a genre that I enjoy on a frequent basis, a 7.25 out of 10. So in my rating scale, this means this is a more than solid, really worthwhile album. Still, I stand by my word. I definitely hope that King Gizzard will, after this album now, turn away from their techno leanings and maybe really take their time again, and next year come out with something really different, something that sounds again more like an organic band product and not so much a studio project led by one or two of the band members. I'm always happy if they return to their heavy, fuzz-driven psychedelic sound, but I can think of quite a number of genres that they could still tackle. We still need a full-on funk or disco album from King Giz. We haven't heard them doing reggae and ska yet. There are rumors about, or hints, that the next one could more go into a country bluegrass style. And apart from that, there are still dozens of other paths that they can choose. So that's my little review of Alien Metal. And now it's your turn.